So this week is about weathering, erosion, and deposition. And it was by far my favorite set of labs, and I say set, that I have put together over the years of teaching. So it started with 7 stations, and it grew to 11. And yes, I used to bring in all of these tubs of sand and dirt and soil, and we'd go dig stuff out of the pond, and we'd go and do all this crazy stuff on campus. And I brought in popsicle sticks and glass bottles and tons of stuff, sugar cubes, everything you could possibly need in order to do these labs. And then COVID hit. So they're all sitting in my garage, but I wanted to give you guys the opportunity to choose 4 of them that seem like the least amount of trouble for you to put together with what you have in your house. So if you don't have it in your house, don't do that one, pick a different one, unless you want to go out, meaning you might have to go outside and get some dirt or something and water and things like that. But okay, so let me talk about what you're going to do. What you're going to do is 2 things this week. You're going to do a notebook. So depending on which lab you choose, some of them ask questions, so you'll answer the questions and you'll just take pictures of those like you normally do. Nothing special about that. So it's kind of like a lab notebook like you would take while you're doing the lab. Some of them say, create a hypothesis, what's going to happen when I put 10 sugar cubes inside a mason jar with 2 rocks and I shake it 100 times, right? So you would say something like, I think that the sugar cubes are going to be completely obliterated by the rocks that I've placed in this jar, right? Or, just kind of what do you think? Guess. It doesn't even have to be a hypothesis, just a guess. Because a hypothesis is an educated guess. You may not know what's going to happen. So just swag it. Just be like, I think this is what's going to happen. And then do it. And you're like, yep, well, that didn't happen, but this did. And so I want to talk a little bit about each of the labs that you have. I'm trying to see where my little thing is. I think it's here. All right, so you're going to do that, and then you're going to create a Flipgrid. If you're not familiar with Flipgrid, it's just a way to create like a video discussion instead of a typed up discussion. So ideally, what you would do is you record the results of your lab experiment, maybe like a before, hey, I've put the sugar cubes in the glass bottle with my 2 rocks. Here it is. Okay, now I'm going to shake it 100 times and maybe pause your video, or maybe you do one of those, Apple time lapse. I don't know how those work, but that would be kind of cool. You're like shaking. And then after, I've had students just like put all of the results, like their before and after stuff. So they did like all of their before. So they had like 4 labs and they had them all set up like on their kitchen table. Some people went to like parks and stuff like that because they wanted to find sand. Because they live in the city and they don't just walk outside their door and find sand. They actually have to like go to a playground and find sand. But many of you probably could just walk outside and get something that was pretty sandy in relationship, whereas you would have difficulty finding, say, dirt, which is more like the stuff that's sand and silt and clay all mixed together with some organics and stuff like that. There is a difference. So when it says dirt, it means like sand, silt, and clay, and when it says sand, it means sand. So I don't know exactly where you live, but I'm going to guess a lot of you not going to have any issue with the sand ones. Not going to have to go to a park, but they set up all their before pictures and they record what they're going to do with each one, and then they stop, and then they have all their after stuff that they do after that. And they put that in one little video, and then they turn it in. So ideally it should be about each of the labs should take you about 10-15 minutes. Some of them will take you multiple days only because you've got to freeze stuff and then use it the next day. So you have to like do the prep and then you have to actually do the lab. But we used to do all 11 of them in the class period. So it is doable and you only got to do 4. So it's going to take you about 40 minutes, maybe an hour to do your 4 labs. And so and then you'll just turn in what you got, and then hopefully you'll go back and you'll comment on what other people did. Wow, that's really cool that you did that one. I was going to do that one, but I decided not to. Okay, so let me talk about each of the labs. I did put in the one that says WED, I did put some kind of like hints, tips, kind of what's it about. So the first one's pretty straightforward. It's a 2-day lab. I need to find it right now because for some reason I don't. Oh, I was messing around with the final. I was trying to get the final started. So let's see here. All right. So the first lab is what happens when when water freezes. So this one requires 2 days only because you got to freeze stuff. So you just follow the directions. It's, you know, nothing too cray. Let me go ahead and share this screen because then, you know, when I'm talking about them, you're like, oh, that's what she's talking about. So let's see here. That's not the right screen. Oh, it's this one. Let's see. Oops, where did it go? All right, sharing is caring. Okay, here we go. Okay, so this is the first one. So you're just gonna freeze some water in a cup. Well, first you're gonna fill a cup with water, draw a line on the side of the cup. So it's gotta be a clear cup. So yeah, for this one, if you don't have a plastic cup that's clear, you could actually use a glass. It won't make a difference whether, you just need to be able to see through it so you can see where the water is at from the outside. Okay, the next one is pennies work best if they're before 1980. The older your pennies are, they should be about the same age, so within a couple of years of each other, and preferably if you're going to have a pre-1980 penny, both pennies need to be pre-1980. If you're going to have post-1980 pennies, then they both need to be post-1980 pennies. So that the older the pennies are, the clearer the results are for this particular experiment. It requires you to have vinegar. It asks for you to have a beaker. I don't expect you to have a beaker in your house. So, you know, use your best judgment. This one needs to be, it could be plastic, but not the new age fake plastic. The plant-based plastic won't work for this because it's got to sit there for a while. And the acid in the vinegar will eat through the plant plastic. So you don't want to do that. So it needs to be like real plastic, or you can also use a glass for this one if you have like clear glasses at home. And you're going to need 2 of those and a penny in each one. And so you have to kind of do a little bit of like, what are they trying to get me to do? Okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to use instead because this is what I have. So that one's kind of cool. The next one requires you to have some antacid tablets. Alka-Seltzer works the best, but if you don't have antacid tablets, then don't go buy them because they only come in a giant like package of them. And again, it calls for a beaker, but you can just use just a glass works best. And your phone for a clock. This one here requires you to have some chalk. It could be colored chalk. It doesn't matter. It just needs to be chalk. One word of a recommendation: do not use the same thing that you make guacamole in. I speak from experience. To grind your chalk with, you need to have a dedicated way to break the chalk up. If you don't have like a mortar and pestle, which is, you know, like a bowl for making the guacamole and squishing, then you could just use like I've used in the past, we've done like hammers. Rolling pins work really well if you've got one of those, but basically you need to break the limestone rock, which is essentially chalk. If you can find real chalk rather than the dustless kind, that actually works better because it has a higher chalk content. But either way, you'll be able to see it. Again, you need vinegar. So If you don't have that, then don't do this one. The next one requires, again, iron wool. Steel wool works okay, but you don't want to use the same kind that you use in the kitchen because those have coatings on them so that they don't break down. You need like real, steel wool. I haven't seen a lot of people do this one because most people have the steel wool that they use for, cleaning their pots and pans, but they don't necessarily have the same kind. But if you, live with somebody who does a lot of painting, they might have some steel wool. Or if you do a lot of painting, like house painting, then they might have steel wool because it's good for sanding stuff. And then tweezers only to keep yourself from getting cut by the steel wool because it will kind of cut you a little bit. The next one, sugar cubes in a jar. This one, you have to have something that screws on tightly, and it needs to be glass. So, those Frappuccino bottles work really well if you're into those. Or if you, have a mason jar, or you eat pickles or jam or something like that, and you have the jar left over. I like to eat the peaches in juice, but it needs to be glass because the process requires, and when you shake it, you need to shake it very vigorously. The other thing is, it's got to be a sugar cube. I had somebody try to use sugar grains. It won't work. So if sugar cubes used to be very popular, you could go to any restaurant and they would be there. Not so much anymore. So again, I have like 3 boxes of them in my garage. So if you'd like to come down to, just kidding. So again, this one may be a little tricky, but somebody tried, they're like, oh, well, sugar, got it. So they put some sugar in there, approximately the same amount, because each sugar cube is a teaspoon, and they shook it up, and they're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to get. And I was like, well, you're supposed to use sugar cubes for a reason. So there's that one. This one, sandpaper and rocks. Just go out and find a couple of rocks in your yard, or on your walk with your dog or whatever. And then you need some sandpaper, something abrasive. And you're going to, rub the rock samples and see what happens with physical weathering. Let's see. This one works well for, this is not too difficult. You should have all of this stuff sitting around. So water, a beaker with a pouring lip. That just means like a liquid measuring cup works really well. If you don't have a beaker with a pouring lip, a paper cup, like a Dixie cup, works well because you can like pinch it and make it have a pouring lip. You don't want to use like a regular glass though, because too much water will come out. You have to overcome the cohesive value of water molecules, and so it's really hard to do. I mean, you could still do it, but it's really kind of hard to kind of create the type of atmosphere we're looking for when you're pouring the water out. And then dry sand, which hopefully if you live up in the high desert, it's all around you. And if you wait long enough, you just put a bucket outside and probably catch some as it blows past your house. So that one's there. Oh, and then for a large pan, you can just use, just something so you're not messy is all that's about. So it's, so if you're going to put all the sand inside of a pan. So, don't use your skillet that you like to eat with, but, if you have like a cookie pan, or not a cookie sheet, but like a pan for making cakes or something like that, that would work. Or, one of those turkey roaster pans, if you got one of those. Like I said, don't go out and spend tons of money. Find something that'll work. And this is another one. This one requires textbooks or just something to kind of pick stuff up, because you're going to put it at an angle. Again, the beaker with the pouring spout, either a liquid measuring cup or Dixie cup, a paper cup that you can crease so that the water doesn't come all out at once. And then this one asks for dirt. And remember, dirt is not just sand. So you have to actually, find some dirt somewhere. So if you have like a lawn or something, you might have some dirt. If you have all xeriscaping, then you might have to go to the park or something. I don't know where you find dirt. but it should have more than just sand in it. And so you would do that one. This one again is sand. For this one, if you can, and I'm not saying you have to, but if you can get, you know, in the desert, all the fine sand particles kind of blow away and they leave the bigger particles on top, the bigger sand, it's still sand, but it's the larger of the sand particles. You scrape those off and get the underlaid stuff. That will actually, because you're supposed to be making like beach sand, but you don't have to have beach sand. You can use the same sand. You just, if you can get rid of some of that top, you know, the big pieces of sand, and kind of move those out of the way and kind of get the stuff underneath that hasn't had, you know, air rushing past it and displacing it, you know, to your neighbor's house or somewhere like that. Station 10 works. This one kind of requires a large pan because you're going to slosh the water back and forth. You're doing like wave action on a beach. So the longer the pan, the better. But again, you know, whatever you got works. And this one, again, requires 2 days because you have to make the little mini glaciers. And then you need clay. So this one's a little bit trickier. Again, if you don't have, you know, modeling clay around your house, then you're not going to want to do this one. And a brick. And so, and the brick is to provide weight to the situation. So, so let's see, length of the clay, pick it up and see what it left, record your observations. Now slide it across the brick, pushing down, do this several times and feel the brick and see if you notice, oh, that's right, you're supposed to abrade the brick too. And that's the last one. So those are the 11 stations. And as I said in my WED page, if you do station 11, and you remind me in your notes, hey, I did station 11, I'll give you extra credit. I had somebody follow up and say, Pitts, didn't you say if we did station 11 that you'd give us extra credit? And I was like, oh yeah, I knew that, but I totally forgot that that one was station 11. But because it requires extra effort, I mean, you really have to have the brick. You've really got to make the little mini glaciers. And so, you know, it's got to freeze overnight, and the mini glaciers require some, you know, time and energy because you don't want the sand to like be on top. You want it kind of be evenly distributed through your ice. And so, so it takes a little bit of time to kind of create those little mini glaciers. And so that's all we're really doing this week, is those two activities. So it's a photo of any notes or anything that it asks you to do. So this one says, for example, on this mini glacier one, it says, you know, in your lab notebook, record whether you think the exploration demonstrated chemical, mechanical, or erosion. And so you're going to write this demonstrated, whichever one you think it is. That one should be a little more educated because you should know what weathering, erosion, and deposition is. And you should know that because I'm going to tell you again what it is. So there's 3 different processes that cause rocks to change shape. The first one, and probably the most confusing one because a lot of people call weathering erosion, even though it's not, is weathering. So weathering is the taking of a rock and changing its physical shape. So it's the breaking down of the rock. So if I have a rock that's this big and then I erode it, I weather it and it's now only this big, that is weathering. Okay, so it's the changing the shape of the rock. So anytime you're changing the shape of a rock, it's called weathering. All right. And there's different types of weathering. There's physical weathering, or what we call mechanical weathering, which is when one thing like scrapes across another. All right. So you've got two different surfaces and one of them scratches the other surface. That is physical, or what we call mechanical weathering. The second type of weathering is called chemical weathering. That's going to be a change in the chemical composition of something. So the most perfect example of chemical weathering is rust or oxidation. So if the rock goes from one color to another, but it maintained its shape, right? That is a chemical weathering process. It changed its color, then that is a chemical weathering process. It changed its shape, physical, changed its color, or, you know, something like that, then that's a chemical weathering process. It happens a lot, like if you see like old tombstones, for example, and the granite looks all like it's like falling apart and crumbling. That is a chemical weathering process. Okay, so that's weathering. The next one is erosion. Okay, so erosion is the moving of the material from one place to another. So the reason why they often get confused is because the things that make these things happen, wind, water, ice, gravity, are all the same across all three. Okay, so the weathering, I like to think of it as a hammer. We're breaking the rock down or changing its color, right? Chemically, right? Oh, another one, sorry, is like when you fizzing, right? Anytime you get fizzing going on a rock, that's going to be chemical weathering too. All right, the next one is erosion. That's moving it from one spot to another spot. So like the waves on the beach, they're not really changing the shape of the rocks. They're just moving it from one place to another. That's going to be erosion, right? And then the last one is deposition. And deposition is like the dump truck dumping it somewhere else. So we've got weathering, which is the changing the shape or the color or making it fizz or something like that. You've got erosion, which is the moving it from one place to the other, the truck moving it from one place to the other. And then the last one is the deposition, the depositing it in another spot. A lot of times you've got multiple things happening at the same time. So for example, like on the ocean, on the beach one, you've got the erosion, which is the moving it out. And then you've got the deposition, putting it somewhere else, right? So you've got erosion and then you've got deposition. So you may have multiple things going on at the same time. So if it asks you, you know, what do you think's going on here? You're going to pick, you know, which thing you think it is. So for this one, it says chemical weathering, mechanical weathering, or erosion. And remember, erosion is moving stuff from place to place. And so you may have multiple things going on, right? So there are 11 options. Ideally, you're doing 4. If you are like, this is just way too much stuff, just shoot me an email and I'm going to be like, okay, you know, do as many as you can. But ideally you'll do 4 and then you'll talk about them in your Flipgrid and then you'll reply to other people. And with the replies in Flipgrid, you can either do it as a video reply or you can actually type stuff in Flipgrid. So I don't typically like going outside of Canvas for you to complete an assignment. So you're actually not going to turn anything in for that. I'm going to grade it directly in Flipgrid. So if you make the Flipgrid, you're going to get the points. If you don't make the Flipgrid, you're not going to get the points. But ideally, you're also kind of replying to others because it does count this week as your discussion post. So your activity is your notebook. You're going to take pictures of the 4 labs that you did, and your discussion is the Flipgrid. I've had students in the past who had difficulty logging into Flipgrid. Then you can just submit your video to the weathering, erosion, and deposition assignment if you can't figure out how to get Flipgrid to work or it's too much trouble. The important thing is that you make a video of what you did. I've also had students who are disappointed that they only get 10 minutes to talk on Flipgrid. They're like, I needed more time because I really wanted to share more stuff. Create a second Flipgrid if you're that person. You don't get extra credit for it, but if you're really that passionate and you really want to share everything with others, then do so. Any questions? And just remember, this was my favorite lab it was everybody's favorite because everybody got involved because it was very messy and all over the place. And I always ended up having to like sweep the whole room because there inevitably was sand and water and you know, vinegar. It smelled like vinegar in the entire classroom because we were using so much vinegar in so many places. I was like, dang, I think I'm gonna. Whew. So, all right. Are we recording video or pictures? All right. Ideally, you're making a video for Flipgrid. But if you can't create the video because there's just too much, then yeah, just pictures. You should be in the pictures so that I know that it was you. But you won't be able to turn in the pictures to Flipgrid, I don't think. I think you have to actually do. If you're embarrassed, you don't want people to see your face, Flipgrid lets you put on like emoji faces and stuff like that too. So people won't be able to see you if you wanted to. It figures out where your face is, and so you can, you know, be like a big happy face or something like that. You know, just it's up to you. But I'm not trying to invade anybody's privacy. So if you don't want to put it on Flipgrid, because it is outside of Canvas, which means although you need a password to get into it or be part of EVC, then I understand. Just submit the photos to the notebook page instead, or your video. If you don't want to put it on Flipgrid, just put the video in the WED assignment and I will transfer the points over. So yes. All right. That's all I have for you guys this week. I appreciate you waiting for me. You guys are the best. We only have like a couple more sessions left. Next week, I'll talk about the final thing that you have to do. Not the final test, there's a test, but there's also the models of geography that I will spend a good period of time talking about next week, which will be due during finals week. And then you'll have a final exam also. And I'll talk about both of those things next week because that's what we're doing. So only a couple more weeks and then woohoo, summer. Oh wait, I'm teaching summer school. Okay, it's still summer. School's out for summer. All right. Okay.